115th and Ridgeland to 87th. That's traffic. I'm Telemonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. AM 560 Weather Center forecast. Partly sunny today, another warm and humid afternoon, and that could bring a thunderstorm or two, high 89. Currently 71, and your next news update at 8. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560 The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So, as we talked about, you heard Mike Scott reporting. The message again from the State Department is don't go to the airport. So the only way you can get evacuated is by going to the airport in Kabul, but don't go to the airport because the security situation is deteriorating.
It's too dangerous and there might be a terrorist attack.
And we're out of there in 5 days. Huh?
You think there's some mixed signals going on in the Biden administration right now?
And there's been a lot of criticism, especially from the administration and its surrogates, Nancy Pelosi, of these two congressmen, Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts, Peter Meyer, Republican from Michigan, who secretly went to Kabul without State Department authorization. The State Department didn't know about it, as John Kirby explains very carefully. State Department Pentagon spokesman.
We were not aware of this visit, and we are obviously not encouraging VIP visits to a very tense, dangerous, and dynamic situation at that airport and inside Kabul generally. And the secretary, I think, would have appreciated the opportunity to have had a conversation before the visit took place.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have. Well, they come back and now they say not only evacuating Americans who want to leave, you know, the phrase that you hear from every administration flack, which is very curious.
Yeah, because when they leave them behind, they'll say their cover will be, well, they wanted to stay. Yeah, but we'll need proof of that.
We'll see how that plays out. But I'm sure they would have wanted to talk to Moulton and Meyer before they made the trip, dissuade them from taking the trip. But they come back and they say, not only will we not be done by August 31st, we wouldn't be done by 9/11. So, I mean, is there a scenario under which this works out well for Americans? And right now, significantly, mainly concerned about just American citizens and Afghan allies, in that order, being pulled out of there and brought back to a place of safety. For more on this and that question, is there a scenario right now where this works out well for those who are trying to get out? Pleased to be joined by Jason Killmeyer, counterterrorism and foreign policy expert specializing in emerging technology applications, former chief of staff of global defense, security, and justice at Deloitte Consulting. Jason, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
So right now, based on everything we know, and this changes, moment to moment, as does the administration's position on what they're doing, is there a scenario you see where this works out well for the Americans that are, dare I say, stranded in Kabul and Afghanistan generally?
I don't think so, guys. You talk about that verb stranded. The administration spent a lot of time fighting against that. And then they touted the numbers and tried to point everybody to the overall evacuation numbers. And then there was this sort of coordinated overreaction to the Moulton and Meyer visit, right? So that we see this attempt to shape the headlines and shape the perception from the administration. The numbers that matter, one of them is about people and one of them is about time. There are about 1,500 Americans the State Department thinks are left in Afghanistan. They only know where about 500 of those are. So best case scenario is the 500 we know about have an opportunity to somehow get through the gauntlet that is the airport, or in some cases we go and find them in helos and bring them back. I mentioned the other one was about time. The 31st is the deadline, but the retrograde process for our military has already begun. And so the evacuation efforts themselves have to wrap up in the next 48 to 72 hours. So extremely tight timeline, extremely low chances of success, defining down what success means, again, with your point about the phrase, who wants to leave, all set in a city of 4.5 million people with one airport and a single runway.
And Secretary Blinken, I mean, the Biden administration is sending mixed signals because Biden says, yes, we have to be out by August 31st. But Secretary Blinken said, we're going to stay there past that due date. So who's in charge? Who's telling the truth?
I think we're going to be gone. And if there's any capacity in which we would remain, it would probably be, a few consular officers maybe operating out of the airport. And when they hinted those post-31 contingency plans, here's what I think that really boils down to. We're gone, and maybe there's a few, sort of evacuations to third-party countries where we helicopter in or send one plane into the airport without, an actual presence there. But what it really means when we talk about that post-August 31st, it's going to be about us essentially bribing the Taliban to let our folks out. What other tools do we have at our disposal other than promises of aid and promises of assistance? We have evacuated Bagram. We have limited our presence such that we have no regional basing agreements secured in any of the northern neighbors of Afghanistan. So I think that any presence is really going to be on the consular side and trying to negotiate the safe passage of Americans on a single file or sort of case-by-case basis, which is a stunning thing to think about.
It is stunning. And who's to say that bribing them will work, even if it comes down to that? If I was on the Chinese Communist Politburo, I'd say, if that's what America tries to do, then we'll bribe the Taliban with more money to keep them there, to keep this, destabilizing for America event continuing. Well, why not? Why not force the Americans to have to escalate if they want their people back?
Yeah, I think what will happen is the Taliban has an incentive to cooperate in this particular instance, and only for this reason. Why interrupt your enemy as they're leaving, right? So I think the Taliban's incentive is a cold incentive that says don't interrupt your enemy in their retreat, which is what we're doing. We're retreating. But you make a good point here, an underappreciated point about China. What is China's main export model around the world other than goods, cheap goods? It's to dictatorships. They offer short-term stability. And so the financial lifeline that China and Russia and Pakistan could provide the Taliban is the very thing that will insulate them from future Western pressure.
And with respect to the Taliban, even if they didn't, and hopefully, obviously, this doesn't happen, go so far as to start executing Americans, why not hold Americans longer, make this a news story, and further humiliate this country?
Yeah, I think that short term, that's the calculation they have to make, which is, do they kind of advertise themselves as the hostile nation that they are this soon? Or do they make nice and see if they can secure funding? Let me give you an example. The German envoy to Afghanistan, and obviously that's someone working very hard in very dire circumstances, has said, hey, the Taliban has agreed that we'll be able to get some people out after August 31st. And guess what was the very next announcement? And the German government pledges aid to the Taliban, contingent on et cetera, et cetera. So I think the Taliban's ready to take that money. They've got salaries to pay. They've got to do that. The question then long-term is, one, even if they said protect all the Americans, one, will the frontline troops who have been indoctrinated the way that they have obey those orders in a far-off province somewhere? Maybe not. And then two is, if they can't even control the ISIS threat within their country, then we're already seeing an example of the very thing that justified us going in the first place, which is the terrorist threat emanating from Afghanistan.
Do you think that this is going to end, peacefully or without a terrorist attack of some sort?
It's hard to predict. I hope so. And what I don't like is that I'm just reduced to hoping, right? Can all the Americans get safely through that gauntlet? Can they get through Taliban checkpoints? It's incredible to think that that's what we're dependent on. Can, with a fluid security situation on the ground, if there is an attack, can it happen not in the next 72 hours? We're reduced to hoping that right now. And I think that's an important thing for the listeners. This is the most tenuous time right now. Not last week, not the week previous. As this comes to sort of a screeching halt and screeching of wheels pulling up off the runway, everybody in Afghanistan that wants to leave is going to get more desperate. The terrorists are going to get more motivated to attack. And then the question is, how does that terrorist threat reconstitute itself over the next few years?
Right, and you have still no real handle on how many Americans are there. There's never been disclosure on the number of Americans who self-reported to say that somebody wants to go with others. I just don't buy any of this.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point yesterday, right? So there was this number of 4,100 that was mentioned, and then it was pulled back less than an hour later. And earlier we had heard numbers as high as 10,000 or even much higher numbers. And then it got down to 500 we know of, maybe 1,000 others. When it's that big of a divergence, what you know is they have no clue.
Right.
And so very rarely does any administration get caught this flat-footed that we see the sausage being made in this kind of painful and granular detail. And what that tells you is this is what government not functioning well looks like. Right? They're behind the talking points. They're contradicting themselves. DOD says one thing, state says another, Blinken says a third, even though he's ostensibly the head of state, the State Department. So when we see this happen, that's when we know we've got sort of a reactive Nixonian level of denial, kind of matched with the incompetence of Carter.
That's a pretty good summation. Jason Killmeyer, counterterrorism and foreign policy expert specializing in emergency technology applications, former Chief of Staff of Global Defense, Security, and Justice at Deloitte Consulting. Jason, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for the company, guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
When you're serious about your concealed carry training and education and are ready to learn from an active police officer with a teaching degree, check out Illinois